As you're working on the layout of your sheets, you sometimes want to line up views across not only the same sheet, but sometimes across multiple sheets. Now, lining up views across the same sheet is pretty easy to do. Revit actually does a really nice job of finding alignments for you automatically, but lining them up across different sheets can sometimes be a little bit more challenging. So in this movie, we're going to look at the guidegrid feature, and this is a tool that we can use to help us line up views across multiple sheets. So I'm in a file called guidegrid, and I'm looking at the A1 floor plans view. And if you have two views on the same sheet and they're not aligned with one another, it's pretty easy to get them lined up. You just simply take the view and you start to drag it, and what you'll see is when it gets close, it'll automatically snap. So Revit kind of senses where the alignment point is, and you can see that those two floor plans are lined up pretty well with one another. Where you sometimes have a little bit more of a challenge is here. If I go to the reflected ceiling plan view, and then I'm going to type WT for window tile, if you compare the distance of these two views away from the title block from these two, you'll notice that the reflected ceiling plan views are not lined up the same as the floor plans, and often it makes a nicer, more professional presentation if you have consistent alignment from one sheet to the next. So I'm going to use the guide grid feature to help me achieve this alignment. So I'm going to maximize up the floor plan here again. And the first step is to access the guide grid feature. And that's located on the View tab on the Sheet Composition panel. Now, when I click that button, you might have some existing guide grids already in your file. So you can just simply choose the one that you want. In this case, I have one called Detail Views that I previously created. Or if you like, you can create a new guide grid. And that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to go down and choose New Grid, and I'm going to call this Plan Views. Now, the name is just for you to keep it straight. It's not really that important what you call it, but I'm going to use this guide grid for Plan Views. So the guide grid will appear on screen as this light blue colored grid. It almost looks like graph paper. And if I select it, I can select it out here at the edge. It will highlight, and you'll see some properties for it here on the Properties palette. So this 1 inch is just a little bit too dense. So let's address that first. So I'm going to come over here to the grid spacing, and I'm going to try something like 6 inches. And let's apply that and see what that gives me. Now, the spacing is much looser now, perhaps a little bit less busy. Now, here's the way that this feature works. I'm going to zoom in like so, and you can align datum elements like grids, reference planes, and levels in the viewports with the intersections of the lines on the guide grid. So right here, grid line A is really close to this vertical line here. This line passes between lines 3 and 4. So that one might not be a great choice, but if you look down here, this grid line is really close to grid 1. So if I zoom in nice and close here, I could move this viewport slightly and get A1 snapped perfectly to that intersection, and then that will give me a frame of reference. Then I can go into my other views and use that same location to get a consistent placement from one sheet to the next. So what you do is you select the viewport, and I can just do that even zoomed in like this. Just click anywhere and the viewport is highlighted. You can confirm it right here or right here. Then I go to my move command, and for the start point of the move, I want to use the intersection right here between grid line 1A. Click it. Then I can snap to the intersection right here on the guide grid, and that will move my viewport just slightly to get it to line up with those two guide grids. I'm going to zoom back out. Now, this one is shifted a little bit, but we need to find another point that we can use here for the lower one. And it looks like, if I zoom in over here, that A4 is real close to that intersection. So that's the one I'm going to use in this case. There's my start point. There's my, sometimes you have to zoom to get it to find it. There it is right there. Now I'm lined up perfectly in both directions. I'll do a ZF for zoom to fit. Both of those views are lined up. And now what I can do is go back to my reflected ceiling plan. Over here on the Properties palette, scroll down, locate the Guide Grid feature, choose Plan Views. Notice it'll overlay the same grid, and now all I have to do is move the viewports to the same general locations. So if I zoom in over here, I want to select this viewport and go from A1 to that intersection. Zoom out. And then over here, it was A4. Select it to that location. Zoom back out. Let's do a window tile. And now you can see that these two sets of floor plans are lined up perfectly with one another. If you had a multi-story building, you could repeat the process on the upper floors and all the sheets would have a lot more professional feel to them. The guide grid feature is a really simple mechanism that allows us to apply this reference grid to our sheets, and we can use that to line up views from one sheet to the next.